Okay, well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this session 12 of the examination hearings for the Maidstone Borough Local Plan. My name is Robert Mellor. I'm the inspector examining the local plan, and I'll just deal with a few matters of housekeeping before we proceed with the agenda. The first matter is should the fire alarm sound, please exit via the staircase that you came up, or there is another staircase through a door in the room beyond that with there's an exit sign. Can I ask that any mobile phones are switched to silent or turned off whilst we're in session, please? The proceedings are being broadcast by webcam. The webcam is above the door near the entrance. It's a single camera. It's important that not only within the room but also for the webcam that people do speak into the microphones. Only one, apart from my own microphone, only one other microphone can be on at one time. So please make sure that the light is on before you speak and turn it off when you finish speaking. There are, for the invited participants, there are nameplates on the tables around here. If you want to be drawn into discussion at a particular point, please put your nameplate up on end, and I will invite you to join us at an appropriate moment. Just one other matter, that there's one of my colleagues from the planning inspectors is here to observe the proceedings today. Now, before we start with the main agenda, I've had a request from Helen Grant MP, who would like to make a statement. So she will do that first of all, and then we will proceed with the agenda. So Helen Grant, please.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Mellor, and good morning, everyone. As Member of Parliament for Maidstone and the Weald, I speak on behalf of thousands of my constituents who will be affected by the local plan. My seat currently covers the majority of the Borough of Maidstone and will increase significantly under the proposed Westminster boundary changes if they take effect at the 2020 general election. I believe, Mr. Mellor, you're in possession of my letter to the Chief Executive of Maidstone Borough Council, Alison Broom, dated the 7th of June of this year, and my letter to you dated the 12th of October, also of this year. My submission today is about the human impact of this local plan. It is not a technical presentation with stats and facts. It is about the lives of the people in my constituency. People who, I'm sorry to say, have lost all confidence in the local planning process. People who feel that policymakers and others in authority are failing to listen and to intervene. People who tell me that already they can't get to work to do the school run, to get to the shops and back, without undue stress and anxiety, and people who say their quality of life has reduced so much that with the prospect of further burden from future development, it's time to leave Maidstone. The core of my concern is about the local plan and the effect on traffic in an already congested county town. The increase will arise from 18,560 new houses being built and proposed, and with little or no new infrastructure to mitigate the extra vehicles. Most towns, Mr. Mellor, have their traffic problems, but in Maidstone, congestion is the rule rather than the exception. The town is already at breaking point with jams and delays. I want to mention certain areas that are persistently problematic. My listing, I know, will sound laborious, but it's factual and it comes from personal experience, from constituents, traders and bus operators who are struggling to provide a reliable service. Firstly, the town centre's gyratory system. This has long been the reason why people choose not to visit Maidstone to shop. Its inefficiencies create long tailbacks on all of the inbound arterial roads, including the A229, the A249, the A20 and the A26. There are problems outside of the centre too, some of them all day long. By way of example, to the south of the borough, we have major problems on the A229 and the A274 approaching the Wheatsheaf Junction from all directions and often all day. Further south, the A229 Cripple Street Junction at the Swan Pub in Lewes is equally congested from all directions. So is Linton Corner from all 4 directions at both peak periods. In the south of the borough, the approach to Pennenden Heath from Boxley is jammed most mornings. So is the A229 all the way from the M2 down into Maidstone Town Centre, and the A20 at London Road from junction 5 of the M20 right down to Queen's Road. In the west, the A26 Tunbridge Road from the Bull Inn in Barming to the junction with the Fountain Lane is very slow throughout the day. Hermitage Lane, southbound in the mornings and northbound all day, is a no-go zone. Both of these hotspots impact ambulances and patients trying to get to and from Maidstone Hospital, which is also located in Hermitage Lane. To the east of the borough, Willington Street northbound to the A20 junction has long tailbacks during the morning peak. Newcut Road northbound all the way from Maidstone TV studios to junction 7 is just as choked. Bearstead Road near the Hilton Hotel at junction 7 is packed eastbound most evenings. Then there's our Medway bridges at East Farley, Teesson and Yalding, where jams often paralyse localities, spilling back to the main trunk routes, causing delay and sometimes chaos. Mr. Mellor, I chair a local bus transport committee involving bus operators, school heads, parish councillors and service users. The minutes of a meeting last Friday show that the bus operators have had to change school bus departure times to much earlier in the mornings to try to deliver our children to their school in time in the face of ever-increasing congestion. They've had to do this before, but there's a limit to how early the service can start before it becomes impractical for parents and students, and that time has pretty much been reached. My next point is about a real and present danger to public health. Maidstone has already been declared an air quality management area for exceeding nitrogen dioxide levels. The health of our people is paramount, but road traffic emissions are increasing and will continue to do so with increased housing and with no countermeasures yet in place. Maidstone Borough Council's low emission strategy, as set out at clause 517 of the integrated transport strategy, is still only at development stage, which questions whether the urgency of the situation is really appreciated. This week, DEFRA Minister Therese Coffey reminded Maidstone Borough Council of its obligations to reduce emissions in a letter that was formally copied to me. Additionally, the European Commission has now launched infraction proceedings against the United Kingdom for breach of NO2 limits. And I really do think that Maidstone Borough Council should be reminded too that the government has discretionary power to require responsible authorities to pay all or part of infraction fines, which could be very substantial indeed. Having painted a picture of the current state of affairs, I want to raise my serious concern that Maidstone Borough Council have failed to use the traffic issue as a constraint to housing numbers in the local plan. In August 2015, I wrote to the then Housing Minister, Brandon Lewis, seeking clarification on the difference between housing need and the housing requirement. His letter in response was categoric in saying that the 18,600 homes identified in Maidstone Borough Council's strategic housing market assessment were the housing need figure and just the start of the process. He went on to state, and I quote, "Only when constraints are taken into account can the Council decide on how many homes it can plan for. It is against this figure, the housing requirement, that the 5-year supply of land is calculated." As I'm sure you're aware, Mr. Mellor, national planning policy requires the local highway authority to produce evidence if they consider the impact of a plan or an application upon traffic congestion to be severe. And so in 2015, Kent County Council and Maidstone Borough Council jointly commissioned a study to demonstrate the impact of the local plan on traffic. The study showed that without highway improvements, the delays in the town would increase by nearly 40%. The forecast was described by the consultants as among the worst in the country. Despite this evidence, Maidstone Borough Council has subsequently allocated further housing sites in areas of the highest sensitivity to increase traffic based on their own strategy. They've ignored the findings of the joint study and they failed to listen to the legitimate concerns of Kent County Council, parish councils, community groups and local MPs. Given that the evidence was available in the jointly commissioned report to show that the local plan would have an unacceptably severe impact on the housing network, I'm at a loss to understand why Maidstone Borough Council chose not to refer to highway capacity as a constraint to be applied to growth. Mr. Mellor, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today. I conclude by asking that Maidstone Borough Council be directed to fully address the serious highway capacity problems by A, reducing their housing requirement figure through application of constraints, and B, the urgent implementation of a strictly timetabled and legally compliant emissions reduction plan. I hope that these actions will result in a local plan that provides the homes that we need in the right places, in the right numbers, with the right infrastructure, and with the necessary safeguards to public health. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, we will proceed with the agenda. There are a few matters which have been raised by the Borough and County Councils, which they want to raise in the session, and I'll speak in a moment about how we're going to do that. Okay. Right, the As usual with these sessions, that a written agenda was circulated in advance, and there have been some written statements from some of the participants in response to that. I've also wrote to the County Council on the 13th of this month with some additional questions seeking clarification on matters raised in earlier sessions, and we'll deal with that when we get to the appropriate part of the agenda, because they relate to matters which are also on this agenda. The Council wants to explain the petition in relation to Highways England. We'll deal with that in the first part of the agenda when we're discussing the M20 matters. And they also want to respond to a legal issue which the County Council raised earlier on, which we'll do when we get to the second part of the agenda, dealing with the South and East Maidstone. So, but before we start, we'll take our usual practice of going around the table so that people can introduce themselves and say who they're representing today. There is obviously a large number of participants we have here. I see there are one or two spare seats of people who haven't turned up. There is, I'm aware that it's a bit crowded for some participants, and not everyone is able to sit in the kind of the front row. But I think there's two ways that we can deal with this. Where they have extra participants, either you can swap seats, or I think in this case it might be just as easy just to pass the microphone back to the when people are sitting in the kind of the second row, if participants want that person to respond. I think there are one or two. I've seen one microphone going back because there's a spare one. So, starting on this side, if we go on the table, and I'll ask people just to introduce themselves. Thank you.
Good morning, sir. My name's James Bailey. I represent Maidstone Borough Council, and I'm the Development Manager. Thank you.
Good morning, sir. I'm Megan Thomas. I'm the barrister on behalf of Maidstone Borough Council.
Good morning. Rob Jarman, Head of Planning and Development at Maidstone Borough Council.
Good morning. Andrew Thompson, representing Maidstone Borough Council.
Good morning. Paul Goodenough, Transport Planner, representing Maidstone Borough Council.
Good morning, everyone. Arlene Ryden. I'm Chair of Sutton Valence Parish Council.
Good morning. Cheryl Taylor-Maggio, Chairman of Langley Parish Council.
Good morning, Paul Lulham from DHA Transport, representing Countryside Properties.
Good morning, John Hughes, representing the bodies comprising the coordinating group.
Peter Cooling, Maidstone Calcon, part of the coordinating team.
Kevin Pound, Spatial Planning Manager, representing Highways England.
Nigel Walkton from Atkins, representing Highways England.
John Wild, CNA Consulting Engineers, representing Vinbury Park Estates, Quinn Estates.
Good morning, sir. My name is Jeremy Baker. I'm a local resident, or at least I was born and brought up in the town. I now live in Canterbury. Thank you, sir.
Good morning, sir. My name is Peter Court. I'm a planning consultant, and I'm acting on behalf of Holyridge Services.
Good morning. Rebecca Driver, representing Headcorn Parish Council.
Stephen Whittaker from Consultants Amy on behalf of Kent County Council.
Brendan Wright, Transport Development Planner, Kent County Council.
Tom Marchant, Kent County Council.
Morning, I'm Tim Reid. I'm the Head of Transportation in KCC.
Morning, John Hobson, Queen's Council, representing Kent County Council.
Okay. Well, I just noticed on this side that there is one spare seat now. We have one kind of non-appearance. Can I just ask you to move up Ms. Court and Dr. Driver so that we can have an extra seat for the... Are there two seats? There's another seat up there as well. In the case, if you could move up, and then we can create another two seats here. Okay, well, just a little bit of background. As we've had two sessions already which have touched in transport, some of the transport issues in one way or another. The seminar held early in the examination hearings, where we're just looking at the additional modelling work which has been done over the summer, so that could be explained. And also part of session 6, we were looking at development in South and South East Maidstone, and that also brought up some transport issues. And I said that it might be necessary on the agenda to issue a supplementary agenda following those matters. I say there hasn't been a supplementary agenda as such, but there's just been this letter to the County Council. But the first matter we're going to deal with concerns the M20 junctions and Highways England, and the issue identified is whether the local plan is consistent with national policy for the avoidance of severe traffic impacts on the strategic road network resulting from development, and it's supported by proportionate evidence. Now, the question to raise is question 12.1. Is Highways England now satisfied in respect to the cumulative impact on the M20 or development posed in the local plan? And I'll just link this with 12.2, which is whether there's a statement of common ground between Highways England and the Borough Council. I mean, the position, as I understand it, is that there has been, say, further dialogue, but there isn't yet a statement of common ground. And the Borough Council would like to update the current position as they see it. There's been a further exchanges of emails and so on.
Thank you, sir. Since session 3A on the 6th of October, the Transport Modelling Seminar, further work has been undertaken to respond to Highways England's comments. The first task being to provide further clarification on the Tempro traffic growth factors for 2016 to 2031. And that methodology was confirmed as acceptable in an email from Highways England on the 19th of October. We also have undertaken a review of the mitigation designs for the 4 motorway junctions, and that was undertaken by a Mott MacDonald highway engineer independent of the design team. And that did not identify any showstoppers with respect to design, i.e. departures from design manual for roads and bridges standards, or any showstoppers with respect to safety. We reran the junction models with the revised parameters advised by Atkins, Highways England's consultants, and a revised modelling report, an update of report TRA 037 was submitted to Highways England on the 7th of November. Now, I believe copies of the email dated the 16th of November have been circulated to certain participants here today. That email of the 16th of November indicates that Highways England have expressed their contentment with the modelling per se. The junction improvements have been demonstrated to mitigate the impacts of non-consented development in the local plan. And at Junction 7, where the mitigation is likely to come forward through already consented development, the model outputs demonstrate that such mitigation results in the road network operating within capacity with full local plan growth. So, the stage we're at now, we await the assessment of the mitigation designs for design safety issues by Highways England consultants Atkins, and we will then move forward to discuss the detailed matters of costings, funding sources and phasing. But what I would stress is that the fundamental issue raised in Highways England's Regulation 19 representation regarding the gap in the modelling evidence for the full local plan, that gap has now been addressed. Thank you.
Mr. Bone, could you confirm the Highways England position now?
Yes, I can confirm what Paul's just run through. The position is that we've been working closely with KCC, Maidstone and Maidstone's representatives, Mott's, McDonald's, before our first session and since. I can confirm that in terms of the modelling, we are content per se with it, so we know what the impacts are going to be. We continue to work with regards to the proposed mitigation. One of my colleagues, I'm expecting an email during this session, who's had first look at the mitigation in terms of compliance with Design Manual for Roads and Bridges, DMRB, which is our Bible when it comes to looking at any schemes. The main next step, which goes back to the heart of our representations on the local plan generally, can be summed up if development happens, does the mitigation come with it? So we know what the impacts are going to be. We've had first sight of what the mitigations might be, but the remaining things to work out are how much will the mitigation cost, how will it be funded, so what's the governance around that, and just making sure that the phasing of development goes hand in glove with the phasing of necessary mitigation. Now, there are various nuances to that. For example, we wouldn't want to see mitigation too early because in terms of the sustainability of the plan and sustainable transport for the plan, if you create too much capacity too early, people get into bad habits rather than achieving the modal shift that the plan is seeking to. So it's a case of not too early, not too late, but just about right. And clearly there is flexibility involved in that. The other matter is that plans and planning don't stop. So at the same time that we sit here today discussing junctions 5 to 8, Tonbridge and Malling are working on their plan and will be bringing forward a distribution that may well have impacts for Junction 5. Medway Council are bringing forward a local plan that may have implications for Junction 6. Swale have their local plan. The examination recommences on the 31st of January. We're working with them on their mitigation of their plan, and again that will have implications for Junction 7. And obviously in terms of this local plan and the outcomes in terms of the discussions that have and may take place with regards to the likes of Leeds Langley will impact on that. So in terms of the mitigation drawings that have been produced, we're not fixated on once it's agreed, that's it, that's the one that will be delivered. It's more a case of indicating that there is reasonable certainty of deliverability of a scheme of mitigation, but equally in the background recognition that circumstances and mitigation may change, and therefore in terms of the next step it becomes all the more important to have the costings, the funding streams and the governance of that with sufficient flexibility, as all plans should contain anyway, to allow for those changing circumstances. And as always, we stand ready to work with all local authorities and all parties to work our way forward to know whether it's a particular scheme of mitigation that's on the table now that will be the one delivered, or it's something different that we need to work up. And that's not unusual, and it's certainly not unusual in Kent, based on the general east-west strategic traffic nature and the general north-south more localised traffic nature. And it's those interactions that very much come down to, for example, any announcement that comes forward with regards to Lower Thames Crossing, any announcement that government may make in the coming weeks about smaller infrastructure schemes supporting local development, LEP schemes. So that, as I say, plans and planning never stop, but we'll continue to work with everyone to work our way through, agree things, and achieve that initial aim, as I set out at the beginning, of if development occurs, mitigation comes with it.
I mean, are we at the position yet when the Highways England can withdraw their original objection, or is there another point that still needs to be reached before that?
We're getting close to that, but we're not quite there yet. In the old days, talking about Greenbelt, you used to have appropriate development, inappropriate development, and then the lawyers came up with not inappropriate. And so we're kind of in the position where we're not saying the plan is unsound, we're not saying it is sound, we're saying it is not unsound.
Right. Yeah, and does the first of all, does the County Council want to say anything about the motorway junctions at the station?
Thank you, sir. I mean, we had reserved our position pending the outcome of the dialogue between Highways England and the Borough Council. We've not been party to that recent dialogue. Clearly, we need to understand the outcomes of that. When we're talking about junction modifications that enable additional traffic to be accommodated on the trunk road network, sometimes there can be implications on the county road network. We need to understand what those are. So I think at this particular point we would continue to reserve our position until the full facts are known.
Sir, I was discussing this matter with Maidstone before the session commenced. Maidstone have indicated that they would hope to be in a position to put together a note setting out costings, funding, governance matters in the next few days, with the aim to have a meeting next week. It may well be it will be useful to circulate that to KCC as well, and we have a three-way meeting.
Okay. The Borough Council response.
Just at a fairly basic level, obviously, as local planning authority, all we can do, and this is what we do, we allocate sites. There's, on any strategic site, there's a criterion seeking highways mitigation, and a number of allocated sites, as you know, Mr. Mellor, have been granted planning permission. They are subject to Section 106 monies, with monies dedicated to motorway junctions, approaches to motorway junctions, and public transport. Thank you.
Okay, so there are sums of money which have been or are being worked out, but there's still some finalisation of the actual design of these specific works and costings of specific works still to be done. Is that the case?
Yes, that's my understanding, and I mean, obviously, with the sort of granular detail, we aren't the Highways Authority, so there's a limit to where we can go with the actual mitigation.
Does this affect the finalisation of Section 106 agreements? I mean, are you able to finalise those? Does that depend upon when you have this costings and funding information and so on, to actually, before you can say what specific sum needs to be in the Section 106?
Yeah. Yes, take your point. Yes, the mitigation works that we, in conjunction with Mott MacDonald, have come up with, generate the amount of monies and the description in the heads for, or head for the Section 106 agreement. Mr. Bailey can go into a bit of detail perhaps on one of the large sites, Land East of Hermitage Lane, which was the subject of a public inquiry.
I certainly can do. I could also go into the issue that the Inspector has been passed information with regards to initial costings for Section 106 on the apportionment table we did for the 3 sites that went to committee. The Inspector would have been past that. So, you know, I mean, there's 2 different matters we're talking about. One, Junction 7, in terms of the Highways England mitigation. Now, some of that has already been secured for the Kent Medical Campus issue, which was set out by the TAs when that application was signed off and outlined in 2013. So, obviously, some of those works have already been detailed. I understand from colleagues from Mott MacDonald, additional work and costings are going ahead of that.
And as I remember, that was based on a part signalisation of Junction 7, and there's a move now towards needing full signalisation.
Yeah, but you're moving to the H110 site that you will be aware. Obviously, one of the key triggers that Highways England on that particular site, where they removed their objection, was funding towards signalisation of Junction 7. So part of the Section 106 for that scheme delivers 1.47 million towards the signalisation of the Junction 7. So that on the junction on the H110 site for delivery, and obviously that is a key factor that will be going into the Section 106 documents that we'll be submitting to you in due course in terms of the drafts that you've requested. So they will come forward to you in due course. With regards to the Land East of Hermitage Lane that Mr. Jarman raised, obviously there are specific pro rata contributions that have been secured from all those sites on the northwest sites to deal with the mitigation towards Fountain Lane, Cold Harbour and such like, White Lining, Junction 5. So there, and the bus prioritisation, sorry, the bus loop measures. So, I mean, there is a significant contributions gained through the 106s. So, in effect, yes, and the apportionment table shows you, or gives the Inspector the confidence how we've looked at those sites, especially down the southeast, on a holistic approach, and we've apportioned the levels of money required to deliver the mitigation, which is set out through the IDP as well, for those sites which will be carried forward through the Section 106 agreements.
I mean, is it the case that if sites were specific sites were to be removed from the local plan, which are contributing to those mitigation works, that you can simply say, well, we don't know, we delete this site, delete this amount of mitigation, and because you haven't got the site, we don't need that mitigation contribution, and things can just proceed with the remaining sites. Or at what point do you get to the point, well, if we haven't got a contribution from this site, we haven't got one from that site, the scheme can't go ahead at this location, but because of other development, there are still problems. I mean, if you start going to slice this up, so you say that there's an apportionment table, so that there's contributions coming from different sources to specific improvements. But if you start taking elements out of it, what is the result of that?
Yeah. Well, there's 3 parts to that one. First of all, that's how standardised KCC apportion their contributions as they've done on the Northwest in terms of pro rata contributions. So it is a standard process that KCC have done. They can't guarantee contributions will come forward on those sites, and that is a standard process that they've done and they have been doing for quite significant periods of time. So that's the first process. The second element is that you've also got local growth fund money that needs to be factored into this, and obviously they are factored, that local growth fund money is factored into the Section 106s in terms of cascades, because in terms of delivery when that comes forward, you're aware of the JTB resolutions, we want to see delivery of that money and the spending on those key priority junctions that are set out in the JTB reports and the agreements on the ITS. So So that is an element that also needs to be factored. We need to take those into account. And the apportionment table effectively showed a clear hierarchy, how we were going to pool all those contributions and look at it in a collective strategic approach to deliver the needs and the mitigation, both that were set out through the TAs on all the sites that have come forward so far. So it is a clear indication of how we would pool. And obviously, you know, there are lots of factors that we need to take into account that we are taking into account, as I say, both through local growth funding and established practice. And I should just add, the contributions that came forward for the sites were very detailed. A detailed assessment and a costing assessment was submitted by the Countryside team that looked at all the mitigation and the junction improvement work. So it wasn't just effectively we weren't getting the support from county on this. It wasn't just or how much of these contributions. There was a very detailed assessment and costing schedule set up for all the mitigation works. So that effectively influenced what came through from the apportionment table.
Okay, well, I may just come back to that, but there's Mr. Wilde, you want to come in there?
Thank you, sir. Obviously, just one area that I'd like to just comment on is it's very encouraging to hear that progress is being made between Maidstone and Highways England, but I think it's probably worth highlighting the timing of that. We'd had the transport seminar with the anticipation that we would be hearing the full and complete evidence at that time, allowing us to digest that and then comment on it at this session. That didn't materialise. I believe we then left it anticipating that we would have a statement of common ground and certainly the underlying evidence and agreed a week before this session, and we didn't get that. And now we sit here with an email that arose yesterday, which you've only just seen this morning, which tells us that there is an agreement on part of the work, the assessment, but none of the underlying evidence to demonstrate that. So I think from a point of view of those of us outside of the immediate dialogue between Maidstone and Highways England, we really haven't been able to have any input into this, any oversight of it, or any ability to comment at this session with any real understanding of what's happened, which is obviously very problematic for the openness of this session and this process. I'd just like to go on and say that even as we stand here today, the outstanding matter that seems to be in place seems to be the matter of deliverability and funding, which is really quite critical. And I think that's particularly the case when we look at something such as Junction 7 that's being referred to. I mean, this is a scheme for Junction 7 that has been discussed and tabled for something in the region of 10 years and has been committed by various schemes and has never successfully been delivered to date. KIMS would be included in that. What we're looking at now is being discussed is a pooling of contributions, suggestion that the various sites might make partial contributions. This is a strategic infrastructure, Highways England. The concept of pooling 106 is not something that Highways England typically would endorse, and I'm happy to defer to Highways England on that one. We'd be looking at Section 278 most likely as a mechanism. And the concept of pooling 278 is an untried and untested system. What we really need here is a scheme that can deliver the improvements to Junction 7 in isolation through the 278 process and provide the confidence that the plan can continue. Now, you'll be aware that I'm here representing Binbury Park, and we would say that our scheme was ideally suited to doing that, being of a size and a scale and a proximity to reasonably and justifiably deliver those works with complete certainty and confidence. Thank you.
So you're suggesting that I think it's the 1.7 million would be enough to fund all the works which are likely to be needed? Is that the...
Yes, certainly. That's precisely the case. And I think there's been a lot of suggestion that other schemes that have received 106 commitments to mitigate those works may well not see that come through. For starters, it was something that was thrown into the committee report on certain schemes, Sutton Road I prefer to. There's no implication that they will commit to the full delivery under 278.
Mr. Bailey.
Sir, I don't really see where that question's come from, really, in that answer, because it's quite clear in the committee report there is a commitment to deliver signalisation of Junction 7 through the scheme, and we're working through that on the 106, which you will see very soon. So, in terms of delivery, there is £1.47 million that's been delivered by the H110 site. So I don't think in terms of the Binsbury Park scheme, in terms of the guarantee that it's going to come forward from there. And I would also say that the whole of the Junction 7 is a package of measures. We're looking at specific delivery because that is something that Highways England requested us to look at and give certainty in terms of delivery on that particular point. And the developers have committed to that delivery of signalisation on Junction 7.
John.
If we look at Junction 7, it's not... there's two sets of development. There's the relatively new private hospital that's been built already, and then there's sort of the second phase called the Maidstone Medical Campus, and we have granted permission for a reserved matter application, a care home. But on the other side of the Sittingbourne Road, there's Eclipse Business Park. And through various Section 106 agreements, the approaches, in simple terms, to Junction 7 have been approved. But as you know, sir, the tests to a Section 106 are very strict. I think the argument from Binsbury Park is a simple one. I think they're arguing that their scheme is ready to go and Maidstone Medical Campus isn't going to go ahead, even though we've recently approved a reserved matters application. But in a way, it's, and I think you pointed this out earlier in the examination, it's a bit of a chicken and egg. If the development doesn't go ahead, then the impact isn't there. And as you know, as Mr. Bailey said, the H110 site on top of the Maidstone Medical Campus, development is contributing close to £1.5 million, which I think is round about the same ballpark as was mentioned by the Binsbury Park promoter.
I wouldn't mind just me adding to that. It is also the issue of the enterprise status. To say that that Kent Medical Campus site won't come forward, the government are committed to the wider area of their enterprise status that's been awarded to that park. So in terms of where that's coming forward, it is a key priority for delivery.
Okay, well, I think that I've heard enough about that particular issue and in this and previous sessions about Junction 7, so I'm going to move on. And I think we've... I mean, I just noted there is still, I think, an ambition to have a statement of common ground. When might that now be available? At what point will there have been sufficient work, do you think, to get to that point?
We sent a draft statement of common ground to Highways England on the 9th of November. Well, we had sent a previous iteration of that, but it was updated to reflect the revised modelling report. So really the matter isn't in our hands, but hopefully with the meeting that Mr. Bown has outlined, we can move towards, the meeting next week, we can move towards agreement as soon as possible.
Mr. Bown, any estimate now?
Yes, I'd echo that. I mean, hopefully at the meeting next week we'll be able to bottom out costing, funding, governance, phasing, etc. I can literally now update you with regards to the mitigation. My own DMRB expert is saying that there are no showstoppers. There's a way to go on in terms of detailed design, but for the purposes of the local plan, they're okay.
Okay. Mr. Reid.
I just wonder, sir, whether it would be possible for us to be involved in that process.
I mean, there was a suggestion that the Kent County Council be invited to certainly that same meeting, and take it you're agreeable to that, are you? And then, okay. Okay. Right. Right, just moving on then to... So, just quick check that. Right, paragraph 2.2 on the agenda refers to an original Highways England objection to policy DM24, which sought an additional point, scope for mitigating the impact of the development of the local and strategic road network, be added to that, and a reference to show how infrastructure may be funded and delivered. The Council proposed a change, proposed change 55, to add additional wording to the effect that the Borough Council will support schemes to mitigate the impact of development where appropriate on the local and strategic road network. And I asked if that proposed change satisfies certainly the first part of the Highways England objection. Mr. Bowen.
I would imagine so. I mean, subject to the outcome of next week's meeting, as part of our statement of common ground, we can agree all wording that reflect where we are and where we need to go to.
Okay, so statement of common ground will cover that point. Okay. I think in the written statement from the coordinating team, they're asking for an amendment of the Council's proposed change to be amended to support schemes for mitigating the impact of development where appropriate on local strategic road network, where demonstrated to be reasonably necessary by KCC highways. Ms. Cooling, do you want to say why you want that additional change?
Yes, and if I may then go on a little further. We are not experts in traffic modelling. We look to KCC highways to look after us and the whole of Kent. And I think we're very distressed to hear the process of dialogue between KCC and highways. Pleased to hear that Highways England are making progress, but we view highways as the ultimate arbiter of whether traffic is being assessed and the impact of traffic being assessed, and I'll use the word professionally. But if I may go on slightly, Mr. Inspector, we heard from Highways England that they have a concern, that's all it is at this stage, that other nearby authorities may have an impact. And particularly at Junction 5 with Tunbridge and Malling, I think we're somewhat distressed to see that clearly Maidstone Borough Council is concerned about what Tunbridge and Malling are thinking. And the Downs Mail article, which we cannot vouch for the veracity of all the words in that, but apparently the Chief Executive of Maidstone Borough Council found it necessary to raise the alarm with Tunbridge and Malling. So we flag that we just do not see how this plan can be found sound at this stage, given this disparity of views between principally KCC and MBC, because I think Highways England will be squared, subject to what T&M say, but we just do not see that we have a satisfactory state of affairs.
I think what you're asking me to do is to determine whether the Tunbridge and Malling Borough Council's plan is sound, and that's only an issue as an option stage. I mean, there's a lot of water to go on the bridge before we get to looking at the impact of their plan on that junction as well. I think I can only deal with one issues at a time.
But if I may, if traffic modelling is not going to take due account of best knowledge at the time, and Tunbridge and Malling have come out with broad ideas on housing and distribution, then the modelling is flawed at the start and is going to be out of date within months. And there should at least be dialogue between NBC and Tunbridge and Malling to try and ensure that there is a strategic approach to not just housing distribution and consequential traffic, but also employment. But I'll stop there because it is evident to us, we believe, there has not been cooperation. And by the way, the statement of common ground between KCC and NBC, if I were to be unkind, it is a fig leaf, and we have got further comments to make on that later on.
We'll come to that later in the agenda. Yes, Councillor.
Thank you. Just a couple of specific points. On that last point regarding growth in Tunbridge and Malling, I would point out that the Regulation 18 version of the Tunbridge and Malling local plan does identify broad areas for development, and that has been taken into account as part of the Highways England modelling work that we've undertaken in any event. Also, in respect to the modelling, KCC mentioned earlier that they seem to not have been involved remotely in the work we've undertaken with Highways England, but actually we have sent draft versions of the report for comment, both in September and in November, so they have been engaged in the process. And just finally on...
to KCC, you said?
To KCC yes, Highways, that's right. And just finally on the point regarding DM24, sustainable transport, and the proposed modification, the beginning to that section of the policy actually says working in partnership with Kent County Council as the local highway authority, and therefore we don't believe that the proposed modification is necessary for soundness, and if anything adds confusion to the interpretation of the policy. Thanks.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, just briefly, as I said earlier this week, I believe, we have given our official response on the Tunbridge and Malling Regulation 18 consultation. And as I said previously, what we key in on is that we respect that there's been and will be significant amount of growth on our side of the border and also on the other side of the border. We fully respect the fact that Hermitage Lane, both north and south, the junctions are congested, so therefore the approach to Junction 5 is congested. And what we're saying is it's a classic case of cross-boundary strategic infrastructure, which we want to work with TNM on, we want to work with KCC Highways on, and we want to work with Highways England on.
Okay. Mr. Hughes.
Thank you, sir. Another of our concerns is about one of the requirements of the NPPF, paragraph 154, is that local plans should be realistic. And we have grave concerns that policy DM24 and the infrastructure delivery plan are based on assumptions which are very unrealistic and some of which are wildly optimistic. For example, the increase in bus usage, which is assumed in the modelling, requires an increase of 64% in the next 6 years.
64% of what? I mean, the figure I recall is a 3% modal shift in modelling.
It requires a 64% increase in bus ridership in the AM peak in the next 6 years.
Mr. Goodenough, can you respond to that?
Can I ask what the source for that calculation is? Is that derived from the strategic modelling, or...?
The source of that calculation is the TRA 36 report, the VISM modelling report, looking at the figures.
Do you have a reference within that report? So we can...
Table 3.3, mode share, page 6 of the Maidstone Visum Transport Model 2022 Forecast Model Summary Technical Note, sir.
Okay, well, I'm going to take that further moment because we're going to public transport matters kind of later on, and we'll come back to that then when we've had a chance to have a look at that. But I want to stick because we've got quite a big agenda to get through, and I want to try and keep track to that. Mr. Wilde and then Mr. Cooling.
Sorry, it's a very quick question, actually. I just wanted to clarify a point that was raised. It's maybe a question to KCC. Obviously, we're looking to get an agreed position between Maidstone and Highways England, and I think it was raised that that may well give rise to a situation which is unacceptable to KCC. Could I just clarify that the KCC will be reviewing the work that comes out of any statement of common ground between Highways England? So, to be slightly technical about it, you could signalise a junction that satisfies Highways England that the queuing doesn't extend back onto the slip road, but it results in a monstrous queue on the KCC's roads. And I'm not clear at the moment the KCC have had a huge amount of involvement in the exercise of the work that Mott MacDonald on behalf of Maidstone have done with Highways England. So I'd simply a question, just clarify that that will be what we get out of this three-way discussion next week. Thank you.
I mean, clearly, KCC's that is KCC's interest to see what the effects on their roads are. So I anticipate that they will be coming from that position and to look at that, and they're bound to raise concerns if there is some implication like that. Okay, so I think it's certainly implicit. Mr. Cooling,
very briefly. In terms of the change PC 55, unfortunately, if where appropriate stays in, you heard it from us several times yesterday, where appropriate is in the eye of the beholder, and what we're actually saying, the beholder here should be the professional entity worrying about traffic in Kent, and that is why we've put, as demonstrated reasonably by KCC Highways, it is their eye that is relevant in this area of Kent.
Yeah, I mean, there is a general issue that the local planning authority would be Maidstone Borough Council, and they're the ultimate determining authority in these cases. They can't actually delegate a matter to another authority, but so they can only take advice from KCC on those matters.
Well, the track record to date is extremely discomforting for the residents of Maidstone.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from, but that is the position, the relative roles of the planning authority. Okay, the other part of the objection, original objection, was a reference in the Highways England seeking reference in the policy to show how infrastructure may be funded and delivered. And the question 12.5 is asking whether a cross-reference to the infrastructure delivery plan would satisfy that part of the objection. The Council has proposed such a cross-reference by its proposed change 116, and that would add at the end of policy DM25-1, the infrastructure delivery plan will support the implementation of the plan and outlines how and when necessary infrastructure schemes will be delivered. So that's the council, that's what the council is proposing. The coordinating team suggested that doesn't meet the objection because of the 160 projects listed in the infrastructure delivery plan, 93 of those are not costed. Also, and the council has separately dealt with that point, I think, which is, I think, if I recall, just in summary, I think you're saying that the schemes which are not costed essentially are the minor proposals. I think that was the essential difference. The key ones are costed, and it's it wouldn't be it's going to resource sufficient to try and cost all the minor ones as well. That was I think the council's basic response. Mr. Cooling.
We've just had an example just over the border, admittedly, at the top end of Hermitage Lane, where the traffic chaos, and I'll use the word, has got really out of hand, and it's partly because of recent development there. There wasn't the funding of the allowance for signalisation, proper signalisation. I don't understand the costings, but those will be non-trivial activities, whether they're 25,000, 100,000, I haven't got a clue. But if there are 93 unknowns, presumably that will not be an insignificant sum of money. We appreciate this is a living, breathing document. It can never be finished to a certain extent, but there's so much uncertainty, and then it comes down to, as Highways England have already used the word, where's the governance? What happens if the Section 106 doesn't materialise? If it's been apportioned, what happens? Your question, Mr. Inspector, if in apportionment one of the elements drops out, what happens to the rest? So it's very unsatisfactory.
Okay. Mr. Chairman.
I believe Mr. Cooling is referring to the new retail park with a drive-through, I beg your pardon, McDonald's and Aldi and a pound stretcher, plus the former hospital, almost on the opposite side of the road. I'm not aware of Section 106 monies being dedicated to highway improvements for either of those developments. Perhaps KCC could clarify that.
So these developments in Tunbridge and Moorling?
I beg your pardon, yes, they're in Tunbridge and Moorling, whereas obviously one of our main asks of developers in any 106 is monies for highway mitigation. Okay. On the opposite side of the road, land east of Hermitage Lane, as Mr. Bailey alluded to, for example, there's over £450,000 literally on the other side of the road for bus improvements.
Which development's that from? Is that?
That's the land east of Hermitage Lane. It's Crowdace Homes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it went to a public inquiry, and I believe the Section 106 is with Kent County Council, so that hopefully that money should be with Kent County Council very shortly, and KCC must have proposals for improving bus transport in that area, which presumably would appease Mr. Cooling or help to.
Well, I must respond to that. If anyone thinks that, bus lanes, bus whatever, on Hermitage Lane will improve the situation, sorry, they do not know the area. And I appreciate that Mr. Jarman is inferring that Maidstone Borough Council is better at planning these things than Tunbridge and Moorling, and I really want to believe that. But credibility is a bit flawed given behaviour over the past 6 months or a year.
Well, never fear. With the site I've just mentioned, there's substantial monies for improving junctions as well and approaches to junctions for the car.
I welcome that with open arms.
Okay. Yes. So obviously, I think we need to move on. Do you want to make a very quick point?
Thank you, sir. Yes, just coming back to the infrastructure development plan, again, we have concerns about how realistic that is. Take, for example, some of the schemes to mitigate the southeast strategic development location.
Yeah, well, we're coming on southeast Mason later.
Yeah, but just to briefly say, one is classed as high risk to, it's a critical scheme and it's high risk to delivery. And another critical scheme is scheduled for up to 10 years, and the solution that was put forward to that has been, which is the closing the westbound access to Cranbourne Avenue, has been rejected by Maidstone Borough Council. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Right, the next item, the next question is question 12.6 as a matter for Swale Borough Council, but they're not here today, so I will move on to 12.7. This was it's also related to the same point concerning Junction 5. I don't know, do Highways England want to comment at all about that on Junction 5? What the Swale Borough Council were asking about was an updating of reference to since the local plan and integrated transport strategy need updating with reference to junction improvements to Junction 5 expected to commence in 2019-2020. And there's a comment about the A249 north of Maidstone, which also relates to that. I mean, so the Council in its comments has said that the infrastructure delivery plan contains information about the timescales for delivery of individual infrastructure projects and progress on Junction 5 improvements can be taken into account as that plan is updated as a living document. Okay. Does Highways England want to say anything about Junction 5 improvements?
Yes, it's one of the roads investment strategy commitments for the RIS1 period. It's one of the schemes that's had to start from scratch. So it's one of the schemes that was always going to be delivered late in the RIS1 period. The assumption it will spade in the ground around 1920. The major projects team are due to have a public consultation on progress to date, options, etc., no later than spring 17.
Okay.
And again, we're working with Swale Borough Council in terms of the impact that those improvements will have with regards to their plan and other junctions on the A249 north of the M2, which is part of the strategic highway network, whereas the A249 connecting the M2 and the M20 is a KCC road.
Right, there was a question in 12.8, which relates to a matter raised by Detling Parish Council, and it's whether the impact of local plan development on the A249 north of Maidstone has been taken into account by the Council and other relevant authorities. And the Borough Council says that the impact of consented and non-consented local plan development has been assessed for M20 Junction 7, including A249 approaches. And the cumulative assessment includes consented and non-consented development in Swale Borough Plan proposed main modifications. Can the Council responded on this as well? They talk about the traffic congestion prevalent on the southbound approach to the M20 Junction 7 at peak periods. And that's the impact local plan development most pronounced at Junction 7, which we've already talked about. And subject to okay, I think we're discussing it. We're going to be still involved in the dialogue with Highways England about Junction 7. And they don't consider, it's not anticipated the impact local plan development will have a major bearing on highway safety at the numerous side junctions in the A249. Okay, I think that's all to raise there. Okay, Mr. Wilde.
Thank you. I'll keep it brief so we can move on. It's regarding the A249 and your reference to the assessment of impact of the local plan beyond Junction 7 to the north. Simply to say that it's quite well established locally. There are a number of challenges along the 249, the access to the existing Detling Industrial Estate, aerodrome approach, also the access to the Kent Showground, KCAS, well-established issues with short deceleration diverge lanes and merge lanes, and quite an accident history in those locations. That really, regardless of the strategy that Maidstone takes forward, impact will take place on those areas, and there will be a detriment in highway safety in those locations. I've got a letter here which comes from, which will be submitted to you, sir, from KCAS, the Kent County Agricultural Society, setting out...
From who, sorry?
From
the Showgrounds?
The Kent, County Agricultural Society, setting out essentially what they deliver. They really are a prime location and an asset to the borough and to the county. But they have some significant challenges in going forward with events in a safe manner due to their access. And if I would... This hasn't actually gone to you yet, and I wonder whether I kindly might pass this to you.
I don't think it doesn't relate to a matter which is in the local plan now, and I don't think that I need to see that.
You don't. No. It's related to their concerns over the road, and it relates specifically to junction question 12.8, is where I was saying it.
Yeah, well, it isn't. As far as I'm aware, there aren't any development proposals proposed for the county showground sites, and there's a part, obviously your alternative site adjacent to that, but as far as the showground site, there aren't any proposals in the plan, so that wouldn't have been modelled in the modelling that's been done.
Their concern, so one last point. The concern is about the increase in traffic and the detriment to the operation of their activity. That's their concern. That any growth in Maidstone would have. That's their.
Okay, let's just turn to the County Council, because the County Council raised matter of development in this vicinity at the Regulation 18 stage, when they expressed support for major new housing or mixed development at Detling Aerodrome. They didn't repeat that in the Regulation 19 representations. Does the County Council still support development of that location?
Sorry for the delay, sir. The County Council did express the view in its Regulation 18 response that development in that location would be supported and that there were advantages in transport terms with that locality.
Okay. And say, is that still the decision? Because I say that wasn't repeated in your Regulation 19 representations.
Yeah, the position is unchanged.
Okay. I had a letter from the AUMB unit in which they referred to the joint evidence that the county and the AUMB unit and others made to the Waterside Park inquiry, and Waterside Park inquiry had some consideration of alternative sites for employment, but the evidence from the County Council to that inquiry did not raise Detling Park then, or Binbury Park as a site. So it wasn't a suggestion put by the County Council at that inquiry.
Sir, if I may, yeah, entirely correct, but at the Waterside Park, the alternatives put forward there were considered by three parties. KCC worked alongside Natural England and the Kent Downs AUMB unit as a joint Rule 6 party. Mm-hmm. Our understanding remains that the AUMB unit expresses a number of concerns about the Detling site. Clearly, KCC takes an in-principle different perspective. So for the purposes of that Rule 6 and for that inquiry, we sought to identify alternatives to Waterside Park, which all of those three parties could agree on.
Mr. Weld? Sorry, okay. Right, move on then to Well, actually, I think this might be a good point at which to have a morning break before we get into the next part of the agenda. So if I could just say we'll take a 10-minute break and resume just at past. Please. South and East Maidstone Policy DM24. That's part 3 of the agenda. Okay, can we resume, please? Okay, so now we're moving to part 3 of the agenda and the defined issue 2, whether policy DM24 is supported by proportionate evidence demonstrated to consistent with national policy with the avoidance of severe traffic impacts on the local road network resulting from development proposed in the plan. Now, I said we have touched on these matters already in previous sessions in relation to South and South East Maidstone in the integrated transport strategy. There are, I think the Council, I think, first of all wants to respond to some legal issue which was raised at a previous session in relation to the outstanding developments which have been the subject of resolutions to permit subject to Section 106 obligations and what would happen to those. Okay.
Thank you, sir. Yes, I have actually had a copy of what I'm going to say done, which has been given the number ED74. I think the programme officer has copies out there, so if I give you one at the moment, you won't have to make a note of what I say.
Yes. Do you have one for the council as well?
Yes, indeed. So this is quite a discrete issue, but it refers to the note that was put in on the status and weight to be given to the allocation sites that are subject to the resolutions to permit. And in that, it's submitted by the Kent County Council that no weight should be attached to the 3 resolutions to grant permission, and those are for sites H1, 7, 9 and 10. Because the allocations are not sound, so it's said. And it's claimed they're not sound because if they're allocated and built out, the residual, that's the after mitigation measures, the residual cumulative impact of housing development in South East Maidstone would be severe on the A229 and 274 corridors. And it's also alleged it would be contrary to paragraph 32, bullet 3 of the framework. And so the allocations wouldn't be consistent with national policy. Now, it's postulated in that if you were to make a pronouncement that the allocations were unsound as part of this examination process, it would lead to the resolutions being returned to the committee for second resolutions. And the submissions also raise, by implication, the spectre of Kent County Council applying to judicially review the 3 developments once their planning permissions are formally issued. And this is also suggested in Kent's response to question 513 at session B, dealing with the South East Maidstone strategic development. It's implied that judicial review has not already occurred because the planning permissions have not yet been formally issued, and so the 6-week period in which to launch a challenge has not started running. This, however, is a smokescreen. There is, in law and practice, no reason why the resolutions of Maidstone Council could not already have been challenged by KCC if it's considered the decision to resolve, to grant, was in fact legally flawed. If Kent were genuinely of the view that Maidstone members had, for example, come to a perverse or Wednesbury unreasonable decision to grant permission, or that the highway objections had been left out of account or misrepresented in some way, or if KCC had concluded that there was any other legal ground whatsoever on which to challenge that resolution, it could have been done. And I submit would probably have been done so. Because it's long held the view that the fully objectively assessed need for housing is far less than the 18,560 figure used in the emerging plan. And this, of course, is a view that Maidstone rejects. But the point is that it's, of course, not necessary in judicial review to wait for a formal planning permission to be granted. If you apply, which you can do, to quash a resolution to grant permission, and you succeed, then, of course, that brings about a redetermination of the planning permission. It's simply not necessary to wait for the formal permission to be granted. If the formal permission is issued whilst your application for judicial review is on foot, you simply ask the court to add the decision to issue the permission to the JR proceedings and ask for that to be quashed alongside the resolution to grant. So the potential for judicial review proceedings against these three resolutions to grant development is plainly a red herring. And the KCC legal submission goes on to submit that you cannot give any weight to the resolutions, because to do so would be to treat a resolution to grant permission as if it was the issue of planning permission itself. Well, that's a bad point for at least, in fact, 4 reasons. Firstly, you're not being asked by Maidstone to treat those 3 sites as if they have planning permission. We don't need to ask you to do that. You can, however, contrary to the KCC submission, attach substantial weight to the fact that all 3 potential allocation sites have resolutions to grant permission for housing, and none of those resolutions have been the subject of challenge in the statutory 6-week period following the date they were made. If there was a good prospect of obtaining leave to bring a judicial review action seeking the quashing of those resolutions by the courts, then the time to do that was the 6 weeks after they were made. That would have had the most impact, sir, so that KCC could have come along to this examination and said, we're armed with leave from the High Court to bring a substantive judicial review challenge. And they would have had to have shown that they had a potentially arguable case, that being the threshold for which leave is granted by the High Court. But of course, they haven't done that. They're not in that position. They've launched no proceedings. They haven't even written a pre-action protocol letter in respect of judicial review, asking Maidstone to reconsider the resolutions. So in those circumstances, sir, it must be strongly concluded that KCC is well aware of the weakness of its position in respect of these allocations and resolutions to grant permission, and you can, and therefore should, attach full weight to the fact that these resolutions have been made and that Sections 106 agreements are being discussed and refined, and once signed will result in the issue of the permissions. Thank you.
So, just ask one question on that last point. You say the Section 106 agreements are being discussed and refined. I take it that I'm just trying to say what form these would take, because we were talking before about them being unilateral undertakings, but would the Borough Council be party to these undertakings, or just the developers?
Yes, sir. No, at the moment it's envisaged that they would be bilateral between Maidstone Borough Council and the developers.
Mr. Hobson.
This note doesn't, in my submission, address the points I made when we were here at an earlier stage. Do you want me to do that?
No, that's all. Could you put the microphone a little closer to your mouth?
Oh. Yes. It fails to address the points that I made when I was here on the previous occasion. First of all, it's now well established, in the Berkeley case, number 2, I think, is the authority for this proposition, that the decision in relation to a planning application is the actual issue of the permission. and time for judicial review runs from that time. And it is inappropriate and would be premature to make an application for judicial review prior to the issue of the permission. So we have to await the permission and then decide whether or not that is going to be amenable to judicial review. Secondly, the resolution is, as I've said, indeed the actual grant of planning permission, and that is in the West Oxfordshire case, Pierce Holmes, which was included as a reference in the note that I prepared and that you've received. So far as the weight to be attached to a resolution is concerned, in my submission, because the permission is the actual document itself, it is premature, certainly, and wrong to attach any weight to the resolution, because that would be, as I said before, to treat the resolution as a grant of planning permission, and that in itself is wrong. The point that we were making, and that isn't addressed, is that what we have in this situation is the resolutions to grant permission, but no permission actually granted as yet. And in the meantime, of course, this process is going on. And you have to consider, obviously, whether or not these allocations are sound. And it's our case, of course, that the allocations under challenge are fundamentally unsound. Now, if you come to that conclusion, then that's a matter that's relevant for the Council to consider in deciding whether or not actually to issue the planning permissions and to formalise them. In circumstances where the allocations have been strongly challenged, as they have been at this examination, then it is appropriate for, in fact it's more than appropriate, it's necessary for the officers concerned to take the resolutions back to the members, for the members to consider in the light of what has transpired whether or not they actually want to proceed with the grant of those permissions. And the authority for that proposition is the Kaides case, which I discuss in my note and which I quote extensively from the Court of Appeal, and which is not referred to at all as a point in Ms. Thomas's response. So what we're contending is that there is this situation, this new circumstance that's arisen as a result of these proceedings, which Maidstone Council's members ought to address and should address before the grant of permission. And it is the case that there has not as yet been a grant of permission. Those are my responses to the note which I've just seen.
Can I just ask you one question of what grounds there may be for judicial review if the Borough Council were to issue the permissions before my report?
Well, there could be a number of points concerning the extent to which the serious traffic implications that we've been addressing have been taken into account and given proper consideration. You will recollect that the resolutions to grant planning permission were granted notwithstanding the strong objection made by the County Council. Also, obviously, I'm not saying the County Council will undertake judicial review proceedings. That's a matter that we have to consider. But what I am saying is that there is, at this time, this is the force of the submission I made before. At this time, before the permissions are actually issued, there is a real opportunity for the Borough Council to reconsider its position, which it can do so because it hasn't actually committed itself to the issue of the permission. And if a new circumstance arises, as it does in this case, and they fail to do that, that is, the officers fail to take the matter back to members, as they should, in accordance with the Kaides principle, then that in itself will be a potential ground for judicial review.
Ms Thomas?
So you've asked a pertinent question, which my learned friend hasn't answered. You simply, for a judicial review, need more than a request to the court to just rerun the planning merits of the decision. There's absolutely no doubt here that Kent County Council were properly consulted, that their objections were set out in the 3 committee reports. There were verbal updates given at the committee when the 3 planning applications were considered, and they haven't pointed to any reason why they would have a ground for judicial review. And I think that is particularly noteworthy, because you just don't get a rerun of the merits in front of the court. As for the key days point, of course, that is, again, another red herring, because in order for there to be a material change of circumstances, then what they're suggesting is that you should make some pronouncement about soundness. And, of course, what I would say is there's a lot of water under the bridge before we get to that point. So that doesn't provide, at this stage, a reason for judicial review. And, of course, my point is that there is no legal reason why the resolution could not have been the subject of judicial review. A body does not have to wait for the formal issue of permission to launch those proceedings. And as I've said, a resolution is a decision which you can challenge, and if then a permission is issued after that, you simply add that onto the court claim and say we're applying also to quash the actual issue of the permission as well.
Ms Hobson?
Of course, it wouldn't. The County Council is not the only party that might consider judicial review proceedings.
Okay. Ms Thomas?
So I'm not aware of any other representation that says that they have taken advice about judicial review of those resolutions, but I'll leave that to your consideration.
Mr Cooling?
Our coordinating team does not encompass legal advice. None of us are lawyers. And perhaps I or we hesitate to tread into the middle between learned friends. But certainly the coordinating team has given thought to judicial review. I can only put it at that. And we have drawn back because we just have not got the money. But we were driven to consider that because we were taken aback by the decision processes behind, particularly the Sutton Road sites. We don't have a view on the merits of the sites as such, but we were taken aback because at the 3 planning committee sessions, one site was passed by 1 vote with 4 abstentions. Another was passed on the casting vote of the chairman with 4 abstentions, and I can't remember the other one. I think members had given up by then. But we were very aware that members had received briefing, and we can only deduce that it was a legal briefing, and we do not know the content of that, but presumably it wasn't members, please vote these things down, so we can only assume that it was, these are the reasons why you should vote it through. So we would have loved to go to judicial review on the process and the fact that the highways professionals had been disregarded in this whole consideration. And certainly, if it does go back to members, as suggested by KCC's council, then we as a coordinating team make the plea that KCC commissions its legal briefing, to be made available to those members when they reconsider the situation. We were considering JR.
Sorry, KCC's briefing be made available to whom? Sorry.
To the members of the Planning Committee.
Yeah.
And we were considering JR, but to be and we don't want to plead poverty, but I'm sorry, we are poor. Thank you.
Mr. Baker.
Thank you, sir. I wonder if I might comment briefly. Although I'm here in my personal capacity this morning, I do happen to be a solicitor, and I am aware of the cases cited by Mr. Hobson QC, with whom I concur this morning, although obviously I cannot comment on KCC's own position with regard to a pre-action protocol letter. I would say, sir, that in my experience it is highly unusual for a challenge to be brought against a resolution to grant planning permission. It seems to me, following case law, which I don't have with me, but a challenge was brought to an inchoate process against the Environment Agency some years ago, and the High Court took a dim view of a challenge being brought before a decision had been finally made. And it seems to me that a High Court judge asked to give leave to challenge a decision of a planning committee which has not yet resulted in a decision notice to grant planning permission, might turn it down on the basis that the decision had not been made. It might or might not be reconsidered. The Section 106 agreement in this case, we understand, is still being discussed and is not able to be presented. And therefore, the actual decision on the grounds of any challenge would not be able to be quantified until the final decision has been typed up and the final Section 106 is made available. So I think the question of a challenge against a resolution to grant, to some extent, is itself a red herring. Thank you, sir.
Okay, Mr. Thomas, final word, and then I want to move on. Do you want to still? Okay, that's it. Okay. Right. Question 12.9, moving on to, is a statement of common ground between KCC and NBC. Obviously, this was written before there was a statement of common ground, but from previous sessions, there appeared to be different interpretations of what the statement of common ground actually says on how it's been interpreted. So that's one of the reasons that I wrote to the County Council on the 13th of November to seek some clarification from them. And this particularly relates to the matter of the reference that has been made to the resolution of the Joint Transport Board, which is referred to in the County Council Regulation 19 representations. And this concerns basically interim measures and up to a plan of the review of the local plan before 2022. The Statement of Common Ground sets out a list of transport improvements which are agreed between the County Council and the Borough Council to be implemented before that time. And there was also been modelling of the traffic situation at 2022, which was apparently based on a figure of about 14,000 dwellings. Because that 14,000 dwellings essentially, the Borough Council interprets as including all the developments for housing in the local plan, apart from the broad location sites, which would come later in the plan period, at Lenham, in Victor Barracks, and in the town centre sites, where I think were excluded, it's also excluded windfall development after that date. But the position is clear from the previous sessions. The County Council, and as I think it's confirmed by position this morning, still objecting to the proposed allocations in South East Maidstone, which appear to be part of that 14,000 dwellings. And so I put four questions to the County Council. first of all, can the Borough Council rely on the figure of 14,000 dwellings as the amount of acceptable development before 2022, which seems to be the position set out previously in the Maidstone Joint Transport Board resolution, and also referred to in the Kent County Council Regulation 19 representations, which was a subject of modelling. Secondly, if not, what does the County Council consider to be what were described in the Statement of Common Ground as the principles for development in the period up to 2022, referred to in that statement? Because that 14,000 dwellings figure relates, as I said, it describes most of the developments in allocations in the local plan. But if you compare it with the trajectory of how much housing is expected to be delivered by 2022, that's actually a lower figure. Because, for example, the sites like H110 in South East Maidstone would only be partially developed by that date. And I'm going to do it with precise figures, but it seems to be the housing trajectory was suggesting that only about 10,000 dwellings will be delivered before 2022. So I asked then my third question was if not 14,000 dwellings in that which would be modelled, or the lower number indicated in the housing trajectory, what growth up to 2022 in South and South East Maidstone will be mitigated by the agreed highway improvements set out in the Statement of Common Ground without a severe impact? And then finally, whether that conclusion relies on the outcome of the modelling traffic growth to 2022, and if it would be different if it related to the lower level housing growth and the housing trajectory. So that's slightly lengthy questions, but I think I sort of give the Council a few days to consider those, and I'll ask if they're able to now respond to those questions.
Well, thanks, sir. You've referred to the letter that you sent to the County Council. That was received by the County Council on Sunday afternoon, and we have been working on it since, although we've been involved in other things apart from obviously preparing for our reappearance at this examination. We have prepared a written response, a letter to you, which is some 10 pages long, obviously dealing with the various detailed matters that you raise. An initial question, therefore, I apologise for asking you a question, sir, but is how do you wish to proceed in circumstances where we have a written document which you haven't seen as yet, but nor has my learned friend, but which obviously addresses directly the questions that you've raised. I've obviously got one or two preliminary scene-setting remarks I can make about the matters that it contains, and in response to the observations you just made, but obviously at some point you ought to perhaps consider the document.
Yes, I mean, well, certainly, obviously I'd like to see the document, and obviously the Borough Council need to see the document as well. And I'll ask for that, just to be the given to the Programme Officer for distribution. Now, I don't know if any copies have already been prepared or
I'm not sure. We've obviously been rushing to catch up,
sure.
And the administration may not have caught up with us, but I can give you some headline responses now. But what would you like to do, sir?
Well, I say the first thing to do is get that in process, that the copy and distribution of that as soon as possible. Well, and I think if we can. What I think I'd like the way to proceed, I think, to make the best use of the time we've got, and because everyone is all gathered here today, is to say, we'll ask that document distributed. But if you could speak to the headline responses on that first.
I'll make a few headline responses at this stage. Yes. Can we arrange for a copy to be made available for copying?
Who has has the Programme Officer already got the document, or do you have copies there, Mr. Reid? I've got. So Mr. Hobson's is still on.
Oh, I'm still on.
Sorry, so I've got 10 here, 10 copies.
Okay. Well, if you could make sure the Programme Officer has at least one, I have one, and then the Borough Council, and if there's copies for certainly at least Mr. Bowen and the coordinating team, and then we'll get some copies for other people, copied by the Programme Officer.
Shall I do it now?
Yes, please, yeah. I say that there are three parts to this letter. The first part was the questions I've just referred to, The second part relates to development in Boughton Lane, and particularly the land there in which the County Council has an interest. And the third part relates to the matter of bus priority on the A274, and some matters which there were some earlier sessions about that. Is it one for the...
As I've indicated to you, so this is our response to the letter you sent, which we received only on Sunday afternoon, and has been difficult to catch up from a time point of view. And I'll just make a few headline responses before handing over to people who are more technically qualified to speak than I am. But I should make it clear that as far as the County Council is concerned, there are and remain serious and fundamental concerns that arise in respect to the allocations in South and South East Maidstone. First, sir, the figure you've mentioned this morning, the 14,034, that is a figure which was provided to the County Council by Maidstone Borough Council. It is not a County Council figure, it's a Maidstone figure, and it's a Maidstone figure in respect of development they anticipate, when they told us of it, up to the year 2022. And as such, it's produced to Kent County Council and has been taken into account by Kent County Council as part of the modelling that it has been able to do. It is accepted an appropriate figure when considering the situation on a borough-wide basis. However, the impact of the number of dwellings considered will not, that's the 1434, will not be uniform across the whole network. In relation to South and South East Maidstone, the impact will be unacceptably severe, and one uses that word carefully and appropriately in the light of the NPPF. So far as the housing trajectory figure is concerned, that's the reference you've given us to 10,000 dwellings before 2022. I have to say, sir, that when we saw that figure in your letter, that was the first time we had seen that figure. That was a figure that the Borough Council had not shared with us. The first time we heard about it was when we got your letter on Sunday afternoon. Therefore, it has not been modelled. It's effectively come out of the blue, and sadly, I say it represents another example of the failure to cooperate in relation to these matters and to provide us all the relevant information. So that can't be given any serious consideration at this stage because it hasn't been taken into account, hasn't been modelled. We're not quite sure where it's come from, apart from the fact that it's come belatedly from Maidstone Borough Council.
It's come from me, because I've had the evidence from the housing trajectory before me. That's part of the evidence.
It's come via you. It's come via you, but it's not been made available directly to us, although it's known that we've been asked to consider the situation, and we've only been given the figure of 14 and 34, which is the council. Well, so it's not been modelled, and we say this, that until the outcome of the review is concerned, I would like to address you later on in relation to the proposed change that's appeared in relation to the review, which arises from our earlier submissions. But until the outcome of the review, which needs to be undertaken, is undertaken, the position remains that there is no robust or effective mitigation that's been identified. And the position remains, therefore, that it's woefully inadequate and remains unsound. Those were the headline remarks that I wanted to make. I don't know if...
So I think we're in the position then, that, as I understand it from that the County Council and Borough Council have agreed various transport improvements, but the County Council seems to be saying that that doesn't allow for any development at all in South and South East Maidstone, or if it does allow for some development, we don't know how much. So it's something to that. It's actually 1C, and this. Let's see what it says on 1C. Right, I'll hear. Right. I think I'll perhaps if I read this part in 1C, we may get the answer to this point. It says,
it is addressed on page 3 at the bottom.
Yes. The point set out, strong objections are therefore raised in relation to the following site allocations in view of their unacceptable severe impact on the A229 and A274 corridors. So I've got allocations 7, 8, 9 and 10 in South East Maidstone, and the new line learning and Boughton Mount allocations. So that's okay. It says, not yet known whether high improvements identified in the Cinema Common Ground can achieve capacity gains on the 229-274, but are sufficient to mitigate the impact. Therefore, the Council considers that the above sites should all be omitted from the plan. Council objection focused on the spatial distribution of planned housing. Right. Okay. Rather than the headline housing figure, 14,000 dwellings. So that, okay. Okay. Right, and the conclusion of that session is there's no further major developments over and above that's already committed in the Local Plan 2000 can be accommodated in the south and southeast sectors of Maidstone. Okay. There's reference to some attached documents, but I don't have the attached documents with this. Yes.
The 10th of September. Yeah. We found one copy of the letter of the 14th of September, which we can have.
And the two other documents referred to on question 2, page 6. Consultation comments on the original planning application. This is Boughton Lane, I think. And the representations of 21st of July this year in relation to the Secretary of State's further consideration of that application, or that appeal.
Yes. It says that we've located them and we'll secure copies for you, sir.
Okay, thank you. Let's just run through those again. Just go back to question 1B at the moment. The principles for development appeared up to 2022. So I think that there's reference to that's referred to in the same to common ground, and there's also said that the principles of a strategy up to 2022 will be referred to your cabinet member, and I'm not actually apart from the list of improvements, I'm unclear what the principles are, unless they're what you just described as objecting to those sites, but.
To read a response to that. So the principles, I understand, if you'll elaborate this, are those matters set out from paragraph 2.4, 2.5, and then 4.2. he confirms that. And I think there was also a question about the role of the Cabinet member that is mentioned at paragraph 2 under question 1b. The Inspector was seeking clarification about that as well.
Mr. Reid.
So what Mr Hobson there was saying is perfectly correct. So if you look at the written answer in front of you, the principles are the principles we've set out in the Statement of Common Ground and the schemes. As far as the Cabinet member's approval is concerned, I've been given delegated authority to deal with this, so we can do that without having to refer back to a committee.
So there isn't there's no kind of other kind of document, I think, which the Cabinet member has kind of signed off on this.
No, the Cabinet member was present at the JTB that dealt with all these principles effectively and the basics of this strategy. So there's no, at the moment, there's no further detail that I can submit to him. What he's prepared to do, and has agreed it with us, as has our corporate director, Mrs Cooper, have given us the authority to deal with this within the inquiry, as we do in other local planning inquiries, as we have done in Canterbury and other places.
So the principles are you say that they are only the list of improvements? Is that the...
They are, and they're not just schemes. If you look in 2.5, so you'll see that they are initiatives including 10-minute bus frequency, 50% increase in long-stay parking charges, which, of course, on that point in particular, for instance, I haven't seen any detailed proposals. I don't think my colleagues have either yet on how the parking strategy might work out. But the point is, the Cabinet member and the JTB were happy with these principles to be developed with the Borough Council as we went forward.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's described as these measures to support the local plan. But it seems that the measures are, well, from what you're saying, that the most of the local plan allocations, certainly South and South East Maidstone, are not supported. That's the position. So obviously it also excludes the Petition 2022 also excludes the broad locations in the town centre and in Victor Barracks, so it isn't supporting those either. It seems it's only supporting the developments in North West Maidstone, which I think are not disputed now by the council. The county council and agreed about those, and most of them have permission now anyway. And the developments outside Maidstone and developments, well, the council is also objecting to the Woodcut Farm, for example, and so to the Kims and there's other parts in North Maidstone. I'm just trying to understand which bits of the support of the plan are supported. It's everything. Well, it's everything in the plan except for the sites the county objects to in South and South East Maidstone. Right.
That's correct, sir. Yeah.
Right. And just trying on so we'll contact that separately. Okay. Right. I'll turn to the Borough Council. Can I just ask before this one on the other matters, does the Borough agree my kind of back-of-the-envelope calculation, essentially, of the amount of development the trajectory envisages up to 2022?
Yes, and I thought you asked that question of Mr. Reid, and he agreed in the first week of the examination. But seems to have been a change again.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly that question. I don't think I worked out that. I think it might have been some variation on that.
I think it was at the very end of one session.
Okay.
Sir? Mm-hmm. I need reminding. You'll have to forgive me. We've agreed to a lower trajectory. Is that what Rob's saying? 10,000 houses?
Not at all. We were on this point. You could be right about the exact reference to 14,404, but I specifically remember Mr. Mellor saying that basically all that's left is, as the Inspector said earlier today, the 3 broad locations and windfalls.
Well, with that, yes. So I think I remember identifying that what was included certainly in the plan up to 2022, what that 14,034 figure referred to. I recall that question, but we didn't get to I think the point as actually that the different figure of how many dwellings would actually be delivered up to 2022. I think we were using that 14,000 figure and not the figure in the trajectory.
With regard to the trajectory, clearly that's an examination document. It's on the website. I think trajectories, there's no secrecy over trajectories. Not as precise as trajectories, but clearly we're talking about really the same allocations that have been made since 2014. We will need time to understand what the written response is from Kent County Council. But I'm not clear what the position is from Kent County Council. If there's a moratorium on any development along the A274 and perhaps the A229, why wasn't that said at 2 of the JTB meetings, if there is this moratorium? And again, I could be wrong on this. I'm not sure if there's a moratorium on mitigation, so it becomes sort of self-prophesizing.
Mr. Weed.
Well, at the JTB in February this year, when the modelling results were presented to the board, we made it absolutely clear that in an attempt to cooperate and an attempt to help, effectively, we didn't dispute necessarily the overall number of 14,000 houses, or 14,000 odd. The issue was the spatial distribution. So ever since we've had the evidence since the middle of last year around the modelling, effectively, and that's July 15, we've been entirely consistent that we believe that there should be no further development allocated, so no further major sites allocated in the south and southeast sector, which is why we've objected to the 5 sites that we've mentioned in the written response. So effectively what we're saying, and just for the avoidance of any doubt whatsoever, is that we've got development being crammed into the southeast sector where we have clear evidence from our model that we've commissioned jointly with the Borough Council that the impact on traffic congestion will be unacceptably severe. So effectively, until we've worked out the mitigation together with the Borough Council in a review process, we think the most appropriate thing to do is to stop allocating further development, to withhold those sites that are not committed, and Mr Hobson's explained why that is entirely lawful and appropriate, so that we can go away and work on whatever mitigation we think will work for those sites. Because one thing that we're certain of at the moment is that the modelling shows that the impact of them is unacceptably severe, and the individual mitigation that we've seen, we've objected to through the planning process, because we don't believe that mitigation is adequate either.
Mr Bailey.
I think you've got the evidence. I don't want to go through it all. You've got the evidence from the DHA Transport study on cumulative impact. You've got the evidence that came forward in the urgent updates from the committee report, which says in terms of the industry standard LINSIB model that it does not show a severe impact. That's clearly illustrated in the submission documents that you've already got, and it clearly shows that, and in terms of the quotes that come out of the urgent update report, that with the development flows added with mitigation, it results in a betterment. You've got that evidence before you. You've got the evidence of the LINSIB modelling in front of you.
Can I ask the County Council how they define the severe impact? I mean, can they point me to specific figures or conclusions which say what constitutes the severe impact?
Well, my colleagues will probably elaborate, sir, but just to help you initially, question 1D.
Right.
If you look at the response to that on page 5,
Right, okay.
You'll see there's a reference to your colleagues' comments at the Borton Lane appeal.
Okay. I mean, can you... well, we know about the Borton Lane appeal, and that has its own particular circumstances, which we can read in the in that decision. And also, I mean, there were factors in there, such as, for example, that didn't have the mitigation which is now proposed at the Cripple Street Junction, and didn't have the had a different housing numbers on that site. That there are some things which are different between that site and the allocation, and obviously it's affecting the A229 directly, whereas we're also talking about sites on the A274, which have they're certainly in a different part of Mason, and they have different options in terms of what roads they can use and manors and so on, whereas Borton Lane, there's only one way out of Borton Lane. It's difficult to say that the conclusions on land at Borton Lane can apply to any housing site anywhere in South and South East Mason. Okay. Right. So, but you've referred to the the way he defined it in terms of that site. As there's an increase of 30% or even 15% in movements will be likely to interfere with traffic movements to be unacceptable, and that's from that site and the junctions that site uses. Right, so let's have a look and see what you're saying about the other sites then. Okay. Yes, I'm just following this. That's the increase in. But this is the increase. Sorry, these figures. This is the increase in movements. Is that the rather than for example increase in time or queue lengths or something like that? This is increase in movements in these tables. Yes, Mr. Whittaker. Yes.
The top table, sir, is the percentage increase in two-way traffic flows on some of the key links in South and South East Maidstone.
Mm-hmm.
And the table below it, in answer to question 1D, are a percentage increase in journey times when compared with 2000.
Oh, journey times, I see, yes. So such.
May I add, sir, that this is the scenario in which the transport strategy interventions have been represented within the model. So these numbers reflect the transport strategy improvements that have been agreed at the JTB.
Okay. So, and this is that. Is that 2020? This is 2022. Is this? Yes, 22. Okay. So sorry. And so saying that the particular figures drawn to my attention are on the A274, and we're looking at journey times here now. An increase in inbound journey times of 9% in the morning peak, and outbound 16% in the morning peak, and in the afternoon peak, 14% increase in the mornings, 10% inbound, 10% outbound. The A229, the morning peak, 13% increase in journey times inbound, 25% outbound. Afternoon, 30% inbound, 30% outbound. And that's what you define as the severe impact. That's the.
If I could just add to that, sir, I'd just like to add that this obviously is the only jointly agreed evidence base between the county and the borough, and is the only assessment that can truly capture the cumulative impacts of development and the impact of upstream or downstream junctions.
Yes, Mr. Bailey.
Can I just ask a question? If I could direct you to the urgent update report for 14th of July. I'm sorry in terms of I haven't got the item reference for the inquiry. Can I just ask the AMI gentleman here, are those figures the same figures that are quoted on the report that went to members for Planning Committee when they made their decision? Maybe you should, have we got a reference number? Because I'd just like to know if they're the same figures that the Inspector has, the urgent update report that was submitted for the 14th of July. I just want to know if that information is the same and was available to members when they made that decision. Maybe if I pass you a copy of this, which the Inspector has, because I'd be particularly interested, because it's not new information is what I'm getting at, sir.
Mm-hmm. I certainly expect that would be the case. I can't see what you're referring to. It may have been presented slightly differently, but it's based on the same outputs from the model.
Sorry, sir, it's Appendix G that's referenced in the submissions.
Appendix G?
Appendix G. Yeah.
Yeah, what you're looking at here is the network-wide outputs from the model, whereas what we've drawn out here are the specific south and southeast Maidstone links. The table you've just shown me here is the network-wide performance measures.
What was the table you were showing to?
So just to clarify, sir, they're not the same outputs. They're different metrics that have been pulled out from the model and just go to highlight really the disproportionate impact on the south and southeast Maidstone links.
Okay, let's have a look at that. This is the DS4B column. It will be in the...
Excuse me, sir.
But that's 20... hang on, we've got it, because DS4B is a 2031 figure. These are 2022 figures we're looking at. Yes. Yeah.
They are for the network as a whole within Maidstone, whereas what we've drawn out in the paper and what we were just referring to were specific outputs from the south and southeast.
I understood that point. I'm just trying to see, are we looking at are we, in both cases, Mr. Bailey, which column are you referring to? Is it the 2022 do something? Is that? Sorry, the microphone wasn't on there. Could you repeat that?
Sorry. I was just referring to the paragraph above the table in bold, which says, however, the 2022 targets includes all development identified for the South East Strategic Development location.
Right. And so the distinction there is that I think you must be looking at in that column, the 2022 do something column, that's the comparison you're making. So the 2022 do something column just had an overall figure for increased travel time across the network of 10% compared to the figures that have just been given, which vary from 9% to 30% according to whether they're talking about the morning or afternoon peaks and whether they're talking about A274 or A229. Okay. Now we've got on the council's figures. I mean, these are being presented as Mr. White. Yes.
Just for clarity, sir, the county council made its position abundantly clear at the committee meetings when the 3 applications on Sutton Road were considered. So the position was made absolutely clear to members that the County Council regarded it to be an unacceptably severe impact, and that our objections had been made on that basis.
Yeah. Well, okay, I understand that that's the Council's position. What I'm trying to drill down to is what constitutes that unacceptably severe impact. And you're saying that it's based upon, I mean, okay, saying there's an increase in flows in itself may or may not be material, because if you have increased flows but they're flowing freely, then that they may have no impacts. So I'm more interested in the journey times changes, and these are presented here as percentage changes, but their percentages. It's got a grip on the meaning of a 9% percentage change. I mean, if it will be a 10-minute journey and becomes 11-minute journey, that's one thing. If it's the actual amount of time, it becomes more significant. Yeah. Okay. Mr. Goodenough first.
I mean, I'd just like to stress that the increases in journey times between 2014 and 2022 reflect the full local plan minus the broad locations and windfall sites, so including the South East Maidstone sites, has been said, plus background growth between 2014 and 2022. And even then, what the percentages equate to, the AM on Sutton Road, the AM inbound increase in journey time of 9% equates to 68 seconds, and outbound equates to 94 seconds. Now, in the context of day-to-day variation, in journey time, that cannot be regarded as severe. And all the changes in flows that were quoted earlier, changes in flows in themselves do not represent a severe impact. The severity of the impact depends on what follows mitigation. And what follows mitigation, the mitigation which is being tested in those do-something scenarios, we're looking at an increase in journey time inbound of little more than a minute. And also on the A229 Luce Road, a 13% increase in AM peak equates to 71 seconds. We are not talking about severe increases, significant increases in the context of the overall journey time for the corridor.
If the road and junctions were at capacity as has been suggested, then you think that you wouldn't get any increase in flows at all. You know that there must be some capacity if the flows are increased, or even if that's being created by the improved works. Is it possible to say of that increase what proportion is accounted for by background traffic and what proportion by development in the local plan? Does any modelling enable those to be disaggregated? Yes, Mr. Whittaker. Yes.
I don't have that exact figure, sir, but it's clear to say that the majority of traffic growth within this area will be as a result of development. Obviously, there are other socio-economic factors to include, such as general population growth and car ownership levels, etc. However, I don't have the exact number, but I think it's clear to say that the majority of growth will be as a direct result of development.
And I think to the extent that this is growth in because we're talking about peak hours, so essentially a high portion we expect to be commuting traffic into the town centre or to other locations within the urban area, and that presumably depends upon people having somewhere to park their cars when they get there. If the increase in flows is so much, I mean, is there that spare capacity in parking in the town centre destinations which will allow people to accommodate that growth in traffic?
Car parking capacity is obviously a thought is included within the model. So these are resultant trips inclusive of parking, etc., in the town centre.
Okay. Yes. Mr. Reid.
Just to give you some sort of assistance, as I'm sure you know, there's no national definition of severity. There's no crystal clear number. It's about context. So what's severe in Dungeness in this county is entirely different from what's considered to be severe in Maidstone. Just to help you with the members of the Highway Authority that are on the JTB and the members of the Highway Authority that I deal with in my day-to-day work, the context of this is the degree of traffic congestion, air pollution, etc., that the town is currently experiencing. So you heard what Mrs. Grant was saying earlier on. Our members, I think, have based this on, in the conversations I've had with them and in the views they've expressed in the JTB. It's based on current levels of congestion, rat running, route diversion, people taking alternative routes to get around and through the town. And journey time reliability, which is something that is much more difficult to quantify and measure, but it's wildly variable. These are averages we're talking about here. The time it can take to get across Maidstone, given the fragility of the network, and it only takes a handful of incidents, or one incident in particular, for journey time reliability to completely go out the window. So just to give you an idea, that the reason that, as an authority, a highway authority, we're adamant about this, is because of the existing congestion, the existing misery for the people that live in the town, that can, and effectively the people that have objected to a lot of these applications and the highway authority themselves can only see that worsening without there being any definite prospect for mitigation. So we've tried to help by agreeing the quantum and objecting to the distribution.
And Mr. Jarman.
Mr. Reid seems to be saying that this isn't the only part of Maidstone town where there are existing problems with congestion. And he's talked about helping, but can you remind me if your authority objected to any of the large developments to the northwest of Maidstone, where we've heard from, as you said, Mr. Reid, Helen Grant was also talking about other parts of the road network.
To answer your question, Mr. Jarman, no, we didn't object to the sites in North West Maidstone, but the reason behind that is that mitigation could be secured. We are not in that position in South East Maidstone, where there is clearly a need for strategic mitigation rather than a piecemeal approach.
Don't understand the logic of the answer. So 1,000 houses have been granted planning permission. Through Section 106 monies, there is money for mitigation, which is exactly the same position as along the A274. And I go back to the what I thought was a statement of common ground and I thought was agreed mitigation. Are you saying that you don't want to see mitigation along the A274 in terms of, for instance, improving the Wheatsheaf junction, Willington Street, Wallace Avenue junction?
These are principles that have been agreed as the basis of a transport strategy. What we are saying is that until the detail of that has been worked up and we have a strategic form of mitigation identified, developments in that part of the town should not come forward.
I mean, obviously we look at the whole of the borough, but it was an even worse situation, if you like, with the Northwest, in that the plan, the local plan, and the integrated transport strategy were less well developed. Yet, development has been permitted. Section 106 have been signed with monies, and your authorities objected to none of them.
So I'll ask Ms. Wright just to the final response on that first.
I mean, it's a different set of circumstances, and Mr. Bailey referred to this earlier. Junction improvements for the northwest sector were worked up as part of agreeing the terms of the Section 106 agreements. So the forms of mitigation in those instances had been identified.
I'm getting confused again. So you're saying with the 8274, for instance, there are 3 signed Section 106 agreements that they aren't worked up? So you need a strategy before you can improve?
Well, we'll be coming to the Section 106s on the 274 a bit later. Mr. Cooling.
Thank you very much indeed. We've just heard from Highways about other parts of Maidstone, and by the way, Helen Grant did comment on a number of others. I'm pleased that by the sound of it in the background, there were views, there were assessments of mitigation, because certainly the perception of our coordinating team, no great disrespect to Highways, I hope, is that a lot of the applications that came forward were just box ticked in terms of traffic impact.
You're talking about the northwest now, are you?
Sorry,
yes.
In the northwest
yes.
and other parts of Maidstone, were just box ticks. It's a very rude expression. It's probably unfair. But put it this way, if there has been mitigation in Hermitage Lane, which I happen to know fairly well, boy, it's certainly been way off full mitigation and is totally unsatisfactory. But from a resident's point of view, it is so distressing to hear that experts have got such differing views. I thought it was only, no rudery intended to economists, I thought it was only economists who came out with more opinions than people in the room. But our understanding is that Kent Highways is accountable for traffic. MBC isn't. And if that is the case, and if there is conflict of opinion, we make a plea that Highways is listened to because it is accountable. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Lulham.
Thank you, sir. I've got 3 points that may or may not warrant a response from the County Council through you, sir. The first is going back to the Statement of Common Ground, which does mention a number of mitigation schemes for junctions in South and South East Maidstone. I'd be interested to know what development growth those schemes are supposed to be mitigating, if Kent County Council object to the schemes in South and South East Maidstone that they are there to mitigate. Linked to that, I know that Kent County Council have bid for and secured a significant amount of local growth funding from government, which is there to unlock growth, and they propose to use a portion of that on Willington Street in South East Maidstone, which would appear again to conflict with the in-principle objection to growth in South East Maidstone. I think the government might have something to say about the wherewithal of using that funding if they then object to the growth that it's there to unlock. A response to that would be useful, I think. And thirdly, we've heard that a lot of Kent County Council's conclusions on severity have arisen from VISOM modelling. Now, VISOM is a high-level strategic model. It's there to assist primarily land use authorities to look at various land use growth options at an early stage in the local plan. I think Kent County Council have made that point themselves in Joint Transportation Board reports in the last 18 months or so. What must then follow is localised junction capacity modelling using industry standard tools. And I'm not aware that Kent County Council have to date undertaken that level of work. And I think until that has been done, it would be foolish to rely on VISOM alone to replicate the efficiencies and improvements that specific junction mitigation can achieve. Thank you.
Okay, so I think that raises an important point, really, about the improvements in the Statement of Common Ground. Obviously, there are, I say, a number of improvements in there, and if they're not as the result of not to come forward as a result of developments in Section 106 contributions from further development, they would so we need to be funded by other means, presumably, and the is it the case that first of all, is the money available to do that? And if it is, was it provided to support growth, which will now not be forthcoming? Which will not be forthcoming if there isn't this development.
Might be a joint effort, sir, but the local growth fund that we've secured for the Maidstone integrated transport package, if you like, was originally secured for Park and Ride. And of course, circumstances have changed, so because the Borough Council are no longer committed to that in the short term, or in the medium term for that matter, as far as I can tell, with the loss of the proposal at Linton Crossroads and the closing of the existing site at Junction 7. So we've been looking as fast as and as quickly as we possibly can at other measures that we can use that money for. In the Statement of Common Ground, that list of improvements covering the South East Maidstone, we believe there are measures there capable of mitigating what's gone effectively now in terms of committed development. So we think there's mitigation possible there that we can work up to some degree, but that is not including the sites that have yet to gain formal consent, that are not yet committed. That's our general stance on that, if that helps.
So was the money for Park and Ride, was that the argument for that? I mean, I'm presuming that a bid had to be made to the fund for that. Was that to support growth, identify growth? Or?
It was, but when the commitment changed and clearly there was no local desire to pursue that, what was put through the Local Enterprise Partnership Board was an alternative use for those monies for local mitigation. But that was not to cater for growth into the future. That was to cater for existing congestion.
Of course, if those capacity improvements go ahead without the development, it raises the point that I think Mr. Bone was saying earlier, that if you increase capacity ahead of new developments, then people make choices based upon that capacity. And, for example, you don't get modal shift, to more sustainable modes, because if the queues stay the same length or get shorter, then more people will decide to use cars. I mean, it seems to me that in Maidstone's situation, we've got these figures saying that we've got some of the highest car ownership in Kent or the country, and also the highest car usage, which is, I mean, it's slightly unexpected to have the highest car usage in one of the main urban areas of the county. But clearly the way that the town has developed, there have been successive measures to increase the capacity on radio routes, particularly coming from the north and from the motorway junctions. And there's quite a lot of ample provision of parking in the town centres, which is said can accommodate further growth, and the parking charges and so on seem relatively reasonable compared to some other urban areas. So and where you have got Park and Ride, for example, the attraction of Park and Ride seems to be it's probably the cheapest way to come into the town. It's cheaper than getting on the bus, on the ordinary bus. So that everything is kind of pointing towards, or over successive years, to encouragement of car usage, and a lot of things, a lot of measures which you look back in the 2000 local plan, which were talking about modal shift, bus priority, park and ride schemes, and so forth, haven't come to fruition, and there hasn't been any kind of drive to secure that. And what's being said, that the county members seem to, and the borough members to some extent, seem to be resisting measures which such as new park and ride schemes or bus lanes, which might encourage that. And so, to me, and that conclusion, it isn't entirely surprising that you're in a situation where you have quite a lot of congestion and quite a high traffic flows and problems with air quality, because nothing's really been done to kind of arrest that growth in car traffic, but instead seeking to accommodate it. Mr. Reid.
Yeah, that's not an unfair summary. In fact, both authorities, neither authority, from what I can tell, supports the idea of a bus lane on the A274. It's not just the County Council. As far as I remember, the SPST, the Borough Council's Committee for the Oversight of the Local Plan, etc., withdrew that and deleted that bus lane proposal in December last year, I think. One of the County Council's main concerns, or the County Council's main concerns for the area, is that the more you start to improve the routes into the town, the radial routes, the A274, the A229, the actual width of the roads themselves, the more demand you're sucking into the town itself, the more you're putting pressure on a bottleneck like the Wheatsheaf, for instance. And wouldn't it be more sensible to look at, before we go down that route, potentially taking people's front gardens, properties, etc., to look at what benefits starting to build a route around the edge of the town might have. But your earlier summary around the attitude towards public transport, given the reliability of it, the price, the cost, and the issues with it in the town, is not an unfair summary.
I mean, okay, there's other matters which we'll come to this afternoon, but just as a kind of starter on that, because the county seems to be placing quite a lot of reliance on the Leeds-Langley Relief Road, which, as far as I can see, doesn't provide any more capacity into the town centre. All it could do in terms of traffic into the town centre is allow some people whose origin and destination are not in either origin or destination in Maidstone to avoid the town. And I saw a figure earlier that I think somewhere only about 10% of journeys in Maidstone are people passing entirely through the town. Obviously, you have people in the south-east Maidstone who want to get to the motorway, and it would be easier for them than going up the country lanes and so on, which they probably do now. But it wouldn't. I think on your estimate, which we'll come to later, it's unlikely to be in place within about 10 years. And by that, and so it's starting to lose its relevance as a solution to a post-2022 improvement, because it won't be available until rather later. I was flagging those up because I'm not seeking to get into that now, because we're about to adjourn for lunch, and these are items on the agenda later this afternoon, but providing a little bit of context. Mr. Jarman.
Just very quickly, our members are in favour of bus prioritisation. That's been clearly stated in our resolutions of SPST committee. And secondly, I think KCC Highways have referred to sort of almost a situation where we're not doing anything about car parking in the town centre. I realise the stick and carrot approach. There's advanced proposals to develop a car park, a council car park at Brunswick Street. As you know, one of our allocations is actually a town centre car park off Medway Street. We've lost, if you can put it this way...
So say develop a car park, you mean develop on a car park, not develop a new car park, right?
Yes, that's right, but I doubt if it would be as attractive to motorists as the surface level car park that's there, and I dare say there will be a change in numbers. We have lost, if you can put it in these terms, significant numbers in terms of the demolition of the multi-storey car park owned by Maidstone Borough Council at King Street, which I think was about 5 stories high. Now it's a surface level car park. And in terms of, obviously we don't own all the car parks in Maidstone Town Centre, but as part of our ITS strategy is long-term parking charges go up each year. Thank you.
If I may just, just add a specific point. Just a bit concerned with Mr Reid's description regarding the schemes for the South East of Maidstone in the Statement of Common Ground as measures to tackle existing congestion. Only the involvement of the Local Growth Fund monies came about through the resolution of the JTB at the 7th of December meeting, which says the aim of the strategy will be to mitigate the transport impacts of future growth up in the first instance up to 22. And therefore it's quite clear that the purpose of these schemes is to mitigate the impact of future growth, not to remedy existing transport issues.
Mr Reid, want to answer that point?
I suppose the only point to make in response to that is that, as we've heard exhaustively already, and the committee at Maidstone Borough Council will have heard in connection with the planning applications that have come forward recently, we can't see any mitigation that is possible beyond what's already been committed.
So it is an important point. From memory, the last time that there was a JTB resolution was on the 13th of July. We can check that. Is that correct?
That's correct. And all those schemes are
and I think the resolution was, because it was basically the second resolution within a 12-month period, and it clearly, as Mr Thompson said, clearly referred to future growth. Admittedly,
I mean, that's the one, because I annexed that to my letters to the council, in fact, didn't I? Yes.
Would it be helpful to have a copy of the minutes from the JTB meeting from December, so you can see the resolution?
Yeah, I mean, I copied the resolution onto the end of that that letter.
So it references the 7th of December minutes rather than setting them out in full.
Yes. Okay. Well, we'll come back to this after lunch, but so I'm going to take in German now, and then we can take some contributions after that. So,
Sir, could we have the? Sorry to interrupt you. Do you think we could have the attachments that go with this new letter we've had put in over the lunch and adjournment copied and distributed?
Yes, that would help.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. We'll adjourn then until 2 o'clock. Thank you.